this is going to be a special occasion. Rana, thank you so much for doing it. And the floor is over to you.
I am totally honored to be here. So happy to have been in conversation with Gary for a few years now on these topics. Help us to go back historically, understand a little bit where we've been and where we might be going beyond neoliberalism.
Yeah, I think there was two fundamental problems that proved to be the kind of death knell of neoliberalism. One is the internal contradictions, the kind of internal divisions and cleavages it created within societies, the gaps between the winners and the losers and the laggards. In the first instance, of course, that was economic, but it developed into broader social, cultural, political divides as well. And I think it's fundamentally one of the reasons for the rise of the far right and the rise of Trump in the US. That hyperglobalization model was essentially predicated on the idea that countries would end up looking more like each other, that it would not only be an open economy, that would also become more liberal and democratic over time. And of course, that was naive at the time, I believe. The real thing about beyond neoliberalism is really not only beyond neoliberalism, but it's also beyond the Keynesian social democratic compact as well.
Of course, the pandemic and the supply chain crisis really brought to the fore some of those in a very visceral way for Americans. And some of the things that a lot of people, maybe people in this room, had been talking about for a long time around the fragility of supply chains, around the challenges of climate change, it gave us an opportunity to say, hey, how can we pivot and fix this? You had a president that got up each and every day thinking about how are we going to grow America's middle class? And politicians say a lot of things, but that really was his North Star. We saw a more than doubling of investment in the construction of new manufacturing facilities around the country. That is not the only part of the economy that matters. Services are very, very important. But recognizing that if we want to transition to clean energy, we need to build things differently and we need to build new things. That was a historic accomplishment. We haven't seen anything like that since going back to the 1970s.
Industrial policy planning, the whole process of development, coordination problems, these are things that have been debated in the developing world from the 1950s. And, really intense and serious and sophisticated debates about all of this. So yes, a lot of these things are kind of there, but it is also true that the developing world was also completely caught up in neoliberalism. The other things that globalization did, the massive increase in inequality, which Heather talked about internally, but it actually was also a massive increase in global inequality at many different levels and dimensions. So if you leave China and East Asia out, because they are really outliers, if you leave them out, there's no convergence globally, in terms of per capita incomes at all. But also within countries, you're getting the rural and urban divides growing massively. You're getting the class divides, the workers and capital growing massively. But within capital, you're getting a divide between multinational capital, domestic capital, multinational growing massively at the expense of domestic, and between large capital and smaller capital. Capital market integration has been really bad news for most developing countries. And I think for people everywhere, including in the North.
The biggest blind spot in economics is that we underestimate the importance of jobs. In fact, jobs are a source of disutility. When you look at how economists go about doing their business, work is a negative thing because consumers are supposed to value, leisure, not work. But of course, the question is, how much are we allowing different people to contribute to society through their work?
How people spend their time, what they are doing of value matters. That is humans, like the idea that somehow the robots are going to do everything and we're just going to take naps that doesn't gel, and it's also inconsistent with the last 100 years of history where we've had more technology, but people then do more idea where we find other things to do.
We are massively under-providing care.
Yeah.
So we're under-investing in it, we're under-providing it, we are underpaying the care workers.
Yeah.
And precisely because, as you see, so much of it gets done at home for free. And it's not, we used to call this gender-blind policies. They are not gender-blind, they're gender-exploitative.
We've had this explosion of various type of experiments that not only generate, results. Do cash transfers work or not? Does microcredit work or not? Does, allocating property, title, land rights, does it work or not? But it also opens up our imagination to different types of policies. It's an experimentation in a different kind of a sense, moving away from sort of the Washington consensus model of thinking where there's, these 10, 15 things that every country needs to do.